Okay, so we're going to start out with today's presentation. We're going to talk about using swatch books to achieve brand colors. Brand colors, logo colors, target colors, Pantone colors, you know, just some kind of color that you have to try to get to a closer match than what you're getting, and you're going to go through the steps for trying to achieve that match. So a few things you can do when we take a look at our files, and we're going to decide. One thing is, I'm going to take these two files that I've got down here I printed. I'm going to bring them back up into the queue. But to start out with, we have our sample file here. We've got a spot color logo red, and then there's some other process builds of colors here. So we need to match these colors to a certain object.
Yep.
Give me 1 second while I mute that person that's talking. Got that one. Okay. And I think that's everybody. Okay. All right. So we start out with some type of a file we have to print and get a certain color to it, match to a certain color. Someone has to give us some type of an object to say match this color. So when we take a look at our files, we're going to first off print the color files that we have. I got two different examples here with some pretty much flat vector work here to look at. When we print these samples and then we go to evaluate them, okay, I'm going to go into Photoshop here. I got a couple of different examples. Trying to go through some of these different color examples. Okay. So when we look at these, we're going to be comparing, and I just did some quick prints of those two files, took some sample color material and said, for example, let's take a look at this and compare. Since we're not together in person to print live and visually evaluate the source object to the printed sample, I'm kind of doing this to simulate that through this WebEx. So you can see what we've got in our main area, the main area of our print sample, and then this little piece of a blue printed piece that we need to match. So when we take a look at our printed sample to the object we need to match. Now that object we need to match could be just a printed sample of color. It could be people are referencing a Pantone color and they're telling you to match, like for example for the red, we need to match a 185C Pantone color. Depending on what the objects are and the colors are, these are going to be some of the things that we're going to kind of look at in a viewing booth to see where is the color that I need to match and where am I at. Now, the avenue we take to adjust our color so that when I print these samples back here in the RipQ, when I print these samples, I'm able to get that special green and that special red and that blue and however I need to do. The example you have choices. You can say, okay, I'm going to go back into Illustrator. And when I'm in Illustrator, I'll produce a variety of changes of that red file or that green or that orange, and I'll print and make variations in Illustrator, and I'll rip it and print it, and compare. And when I get the recipe, that is the match, again, taking a look back in Photoshop, if we're looking at this and we're saying, okay, I've got the recipe, that's the match. Now what I can do is I can design my file with that particular spot color and say, or a process build even for that matter, but I can say, okay, I've got that recipe, this is the recipe that's going to get that targeted color. Because I'm doing it from Illustrator, okay, this is important because I'm controlling it from Illustrator, and this is one of your options, right? Go to Illustrator, produce a series of red that vary or greens that vary, and print them all out. And then compare them. Going back into Photoshop, I'm just showing this image, for example. Go back and compare. How is it that we're matching or we're not matching? What's our combinations looking like? And then going back to the drawing board in Illustrator again and producing a series of squares and color changes. We can do this, and the recipe in this example would live here in our swatches palette. So if I needed to make an adjustment, I would print when I find the recipe that is my green color. that's the match, then I say, okay, I know I've got that green color, and now what I'm going to do is go into Illustrator and type in those values and save that. Now I have to control this in Illustrator. I have to make sure it's those dot percents every time. I have to tell my team in Illustrator, hey everybody, make it this recipe, and we will get this output match, for example. And that's just showing you the example. But now that's one way to do this.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to get into the WebEx meeting, and it's denying me. Have we reached some limit?
No, we have 1,000 people limit, so I don't think we've hit that.
All right. I'll keep trying. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't know if try a different browser maybe, a different web browser, and see if that helps.
Will do.
I did try a separate browser. There was, it would not let me in through Chrome, so I had to go through Internet Explorer, and it worked fine.
Okay, thank you. Good advice. Good, yeah. Yeah, sometimes a different browser will make a difference.
You can download the WebEx app too, if you want.
Don't go on a VPN either.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for that, I'm not so sure with the VPNs. Okay, so with the spot color information, we've got our method to accomplish that goal color. I need to match that color. We can do this through Illustrator. I'd make a new file in Illustrator, and I'd produce a series of squares or what have you, and I'd change their tint percents, and then I'd rip and print it and evaluate it, come back to the drawing board here, change, alter those squares, and keep going through my routine. So that's one way of doing it. I'm not going to demonstrate that in Illustrator, but you can visualize or imagine what that would be like. And that's feasible. It's something we can do. Okay. So in the other examples, we can work with where we're kind of dealing with this information. How are we going to go through and, get these colors to come into place? How are we going to get these colors to fall into place? Well, if we decide that we don't want to necessarily do all these changes, create these modifications that are taking place in our software for Illustrator, this is where we can go into Onyx, and in Onyx's software, we can create a series of swatches with our software swatch books, and then from there, we can find the recipe. Now, if we start in Illustrator here, and I make adjustments to these different colors, and I rip and print, and I find the combination that works. I add that recipe here. The color coming from Illustrator goes back to Illustrator, all right? So that's an important point to make. That's going to go back into Illustrator's library of color. Illustrator created it. We passed it through our rip, and we went out to our printer. We're doing color management through the rip into the printer with the media profile. However, the color started here in Illustrator, so the recipe goes back into Illustrator. And I find, oh yeah, that, fourth square over, third row down out of Illustrator was the match. Then I make that recipe my color here. If we decide to do this within Onyx, I print these files, I compare, and I see how am I not matching. This is where I can go into swatch books. Swatch books, there's a couple of different methods to get into the swatch books software, and I'm going to explore the different ones with you. So for now, we're going to go right into here with swatch books. I'm going to pick my printer, pick the quick set I'm using, the media group, the media type that I'm using, my actual media, and my mode. And now, this is where I'm going to be sending to. So this is very important. What printer, what media, what mode. Now I can decide how do I want to enter in my starting values. I want to start out with that green color. So where do I want to be in that green color? I want to start out with that red color. So I can type in a recipe and tell it to use my color management for my quick set. We talked about that in yesterday's class because I've got all ICC profiles on, and because I've got the checkbox use spot color replacement table, it's going to engage through that library. All right, so that's one way I can type in information. Another way is through RGB. Maybe we don't always think in terms of RGB values, but that's an option. A third method is with LAB colors. Now again, LAB values might be something that a client gives me, and they tell me I want you to comply to this LAB value. And they tell this to me, and they say just go ahead and use that and we'll be happy. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to come out perfectly, but if this is what I'm getting as information, perhaps I work in that fashion. But if you'll notice, below LAB, there's measure patch. And if I've got my spectrophotometer connected to the RIP right now, I'd be able to measure a patch and pull in an LAB recipe. So I can literally take my source color that I need to match, this little strip right here, and I can say, yeah, I need to match this strip of color right here. I can take a spot measurement of that, and then I can say that's going to be the loaded data that I'm going to start from and produce my swatches to get a match. Otherwise, I've got, oh, and by the way, naturally, if we had to match a Pantone color, like for red, a 185C, I could measure directly off my Pantone swatch book, right, my little Pantone booklet that I get. I can measure right off that end of that color. Or if I go to spot values, spot colors, I get the ... which is a search command here, and I'm going to search for my color. So yeah, maybe I'm looking for Pantone 185C. I type in the number, I click the color I want, hit OK, and now it's loaded into my library for swatches, Pantone 185C. Or maybe I print a series of these colors and the recipe is getting closer, but I want to deviate further. If I go to device values are the values at the bottom of those swatch prints. And you'll see this in a moment when we get into this step, so I can type that information in. So I've got a variety of ways of starting out with how I want this color to start out with to produce these swatches. So swatch books, pick your printer, quick set, media group, media type, mode, and then your recipe that you want to start with. And now when I click OK, it's going to open up into my swatch books. Now what you are seeing on the screen is really the default settings for the swatch books, because the other day I reinstalled my software, so this is like a brand new install. The reason why I'm saying that and I want to point this out to you is because as a brand new install, the first time you go into swatch books, you see this patch width and this patch height. Our numbers default to 0.4 of an inch, less than half an inch. That's kind of small, and I would recommend that you increase that number to at least 1 inch, if not larger. So in this case, you want to have a big enough area of a print of those little color squares there to print and give you an example of the recipe, and you want to be able to have enough of a color printing to evaluate it. You want something larger. So 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. I believe 3 inches is our max. Let me see if I could get 4 up. Yep, 3 inches is our maximum size you can go, the 3-inch square. So that's fine. I mean, at least 1 inch, if not larger, is what I'd say. So we have these different controls in here for how do we want to vary. Do I want to make changes just in 1 degree of change, 1 dimension of change? So when we look at this 1 dimension of change, below where it says horizontal, going horizontally, I'm going to vary my patches based on saturation, lightness, chroma, or hue. Now let me refer to some documentation, and I will be emailing this out to you. I have emailed out to everybody, Class 1, Class 2. I still have to email out 3 and 4. Today it's 5. And I also have to get your video links to you. I realize that. It took a while for those to process and render, and so I'm trying to get those hosted on a site where I can share a link out to you because they're rather big files. So for when we're looking at this information with the swatch books, this document I'm going to give you guys in our Myonix documentation of the RIP. But this is a great document because right away on page 2, this talks about why we are using swatch books and what we can do. So in some situations, the printed color fails to match what is expected. So the color might vary in these different terms. What we can do is we can print a series of swatches to try to get as close to the match as we can. So I'm going to zoom up just in this section here. We'll talk about this, and I want to make reference to this document. In our RIP software, our degree of change, our type of change, saturation, lightness, chroma, and hue, what does all that mean? Well, if I go to that document again, we've got some definitions. So lightness is in that L spectrum, if you think about it, L is going vertical. Think about our color shape in LAB, if you will, and we've got our lightness changes taking place. So the color hue, the tonal color looks right. It just needs to be maybe going lighter or darker. Chroma is going to be going out in this direction, which is our degree of colorfulness, or like it says, distance away from gray, distance away from neutral, more vibrant. And you can somewhat see that in the file here, in this printed sample, this PDF file. Saturation is unique because saturation is a change in chroma relative to lightness. So you get that on the angle kind of color value change. And then hue is just color. Is it green? Is it more of a teal color? Is it more going towards blue? Is it a red? Is it orange? Is it more magenta? And to me, hue probably is the easiest thing to pick out. We can see hue easily. Oh yeah, that red is just not red. It's an orange, or it's a more magenta. You know, however we describe these things. So out of all of these changes, this is where we can control and vary our source color, be it a Pantone. For example, I'm using my example here of Pantone 185C, or be it a recipe build, or be it a swatch measure with our spot measurement in LAB from our I1 device. We're pulling in color and we're varying it. This is the degree of how we are varying it. These are the terms that we're using when we vary this information. So let's go back to Photoshop here. And I've got a red, so let's concentrate on these reds. And forgive me, I know it's just a quick photograph and all that, but just to show you, you can still see something on your monitors for change. You know, God help our monitors, but you can still see something. It's a good example. So if this piece of tab paper I got here, this little piece of paper, this is my target that I need to match. And in the background you can see is my spot color printed sample of the logo red. So we can start to look at this and say, okay, how is it that I don't match? Is it going to be my saturation? Is it my lightness? Is it chroma? Is it hue? And you can see that the red in the background here, this is our printed sample red. And then we've got our target red. And if we could try to compare those two and see, yeah, there's a difference in a hue. There's a difference in a yellow and magenta balance, and cyan too to some extent. So when we look at these types of things, we're going to make a decision with how are we not matching. That is going to directly relate to my swatches, what decision I make here. So if I picked hue, I'm going to vary in hue, and then I have the degree of change, the value of change. This is not necessarily dot percent per se, although of course below you'll see dot percent vary, but it doesn't mean plus or minus 1%, 2%, 3%. Because we're talking about hue, lightness, chroma, saturation, these are different value terms. How big of a change do I want to take place between all of these patches? Well, if I say 1, I'm only going to see a subtle change between these. If I see 5 or 6, I'm going to get a middle-of-the-road kind of change in here. And if I go to the maximum 10, I'll see bigger changes.
Yeah.
Now right there on the display, you can start to see on the left, we look more like a magenta red, and on the right we look more like an orange red, a lot of yellow. Well, that looks very much exactly like the issue I'm having here. So hue might be the visual difference of what I would evaluate this as. So when I make this comparison and I'm looking at the object that I want to match and I'm looking at the object that I printed and I want to compare these two and look at them and decide saturation, lightness, chroma, hue, what is going to be my change value to this? I want to be evaluating this and looking at this in a properly lit environment. That's a key thing, right? Whatever that happens to be. You guys could have light booths you're looking at. You might be doing vehicle wraps and you go right outside and you look at stuff. You know, that's kind of fair, right? You're vehicle wraps are on cars and cars are outside or what have you, right? So vehicles. So just to say, you're going to compare this in some type of properly lit environment. Everything we evaluate, when we're looking at color, when we're looking at neutrals, everything is dependent upon that light. What is that light, okay? And then there's other things to be concerned with too, you know, with our personal deficiencies or things like that. But just to say, you know, we want to compare this in a properly lit environment. So back in my RIP, if I said this is going to be a hue change, plus or minus 10, I can see below each of these patches I'm getting the dot percent. And the dot percent change that's going on here is a degree of plus or minus 10. And you can see how we have 43.5 yellow, and then we go to 81.2 yellow. So there's a big difference in the yellow in this color tone being added in there. And that's hue. We're shifting hue. Okay. When we decide to print this based on this one example of hue, I'm going to go to print. I can print a label below it. That's fine. Print this swatch. Swatch book was sent to the printing queue. I'll click OK. Now these two files here, I'm going to get them down into the buffered queue. I already printed those. But now I can say and print this, right? Print now. When I print this, and then I evaluate this again with those swatches compared to my source file, if I find that the one corner on the far right was moving in the right direction, I can go right back into swatch books again, pick the same conditions I need to pick for my media, my mode, and I can go back into my spot value. And maybe from here, I'm going to go in and pick my red and deviate further. Or maybe I say, you know, the patch at the very bottom of that one row, I'm going to go to device values, and I'm going to say that was 88, and I'm just really guesstimating here, everybody. I didn't pay too much attention to the true, I don't remember too much of the values there, but let's say that that was moving it in the right direction. Device values are what prints below those little patches. The recipe of that color is the device value. And think about where we are right now. We are in the RIP software, swatch books to printer, right? RIP and print, swatch books to printer. That's my relationship. I am not involving Illustrator at all. I'm not bringing a file in. So these are device values. So below the one little square on the far right, that was the recipe, and I want to go from there further. So I can start with that recipe, hit OK, and now I can deviate further along the way. Or I can come up here and even edit that patch further. And if I said, let's go to these types of values, and again, I'm just going to kind of put in some roundish numbers, and then I can deviate from there, okay? And now maybe I say, maybe I'm not going to change in hue. Maybe I decide to change in chroma, or if I change in degrees of light to dark, or if I change in saturation. So you can always go in here and modify the recipe as well up here or in the previous step and make those changes. Okay, that was just a quick little run through to give you an idea. But some more things I want to talk to you about in this menu. The horizontal patch number, how many patches. If I'm working with 1-inch squares, and over on the right you'll notice I've got a 24-inch roll with a 23.78 imageable area. I might want to take advantage of that and do that. I could probably go a little bit more, maybe 22 or 23 or something, but hey, I'll just do 20 patches. Why not? Why not fill that hole with that row and take advantage of it? Our software defaults to 8, but of course, take advantage of the media, right? We want to optimize and get as much as we can and vary out all those transitions and those changes. And again, depending on what your settings are, you can make those changes and deviate from there. When we print this chart, the recipe below the square, if I said, you know, yep, that's the one right there, 10.2, 79.2, 91.4. If I said that's the recipe right there, that's the match, you know, and I say that's the golden one after I print this, well, now I got some information to go by. That's device values. All right, so let's say I print this out, And that patch is my golden patch. That's the patch that matches. I'm going to come back and talk about more things in here in a moment. But let's kind of complete this whole cycle so you see the full flow. I use swatch books to produce a series of transitions and changes in my patches, deviating from a starting color, whatever I'm trying to shoot for. I start from this. Could be Pantone, could be a recipe I type in. Now, I print these samples off, and I get one of these that's my golden match to me. That's perfect. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to complete the cycle, and I'm going to add that recipe into my print mode define colors. So print mode define colors, and it tells you right here, print mode define colors is located in the RIP queue. We're going to go to setup, RIP configuration, color matching table. And then the third tab is print mode define colors. And we're going to add that recipe in our library. Now, one thing I want to point out to you is if this was this star file, this is a spot color called logo red. I pointed this out to you guys before. Over here on the left, named colors, this shows me a list of my spot colors. That's got a spot color called logo red, case and space sensitive. This file has a spot color called custom red, along with custom green and a spot color for black. Okay, so when we look at this stuff, we see that we've got the spot color name to this. These are vector files with spot color names. So in my document, I'm going to add that name with the recipe that prints below the square into my print mode define colors. So in my RIP, I'm going to go to Setup, RIP Configuration, Color Matching Table. Okay. My third tab is my print mode define colors. I'm going to add that recipe for the red that I wrote down here and said is the perfect match. Select the mode. You must pick the proper printer, the proper group, the proper media profile, the proper mode. See, is that the right one? Canon Glossy Photo Paper 200 GSM normal, yeah. So we must pick this proper setup. Whatever I printed on is exactly what I want to add the recipe to, because that swatch book print was validated or qualified on that media, on that printer, to that mode. Now I'm going to click OK, and I'm going to add that color. So that color is a spot color, and it's called Logo Red. And then the recipes I wrote down was 10.2 tab 79.2 tab 91.4 tab. Okay, comments, you don't have to enter something in, but if you want to, color was determined by using swatch books, whatever. If someone says, hey, how'd you get to that color? Well, I use swatch books. Okay. Because this is a spot color name spelled exactly like my file, if I go to Illustrator, logo red, spot color, very key here, everybody, very key. This is very important. It's not a process build. I would use a color filter for that. This is logo red as a spot color, case and space sensitive. So in my RIP, I need to add that exactly the same way. Now there's a priority to this. Print mode define colors has the highest priority. When I bring that file back in to my RIP, and I'm using this printer, this media, this mode, it contains a spot color in Illustrator. That spot color is called logo red. When it comes into my RIP, the RIP software compares it. First, it looks to the print mode define color and says, are there any spot colors in this describing the same name that's in the file? Yes, logo red, it uses this is the recipe, and it drops or ignores the Illustrator color makeup. No, there is no color with that name here. It goes to the user-defined colors. user-defined colors, if I add one just to show you the menu, user-defined colors are entered in LAB color space. They're not dependent on the printer, the media, the mode. They're device-independent color data in LAB. So I can type in Pantone 185C and give it an LAB recipe. So first the software is going to rip the file and look to logo red. If it finds the match, it says we're going to use this information. If it doesn't find that color match, it's going to go to the user-defined color, and if it finds it here, it uses it. If it doesn't find it here, then lastly, system-defined, which is our Pantone library. It's not going to find logo red there. These are all Pantone names. So we have all the Pantone libraries in our directory of our software. So all the information that comes up here with the Pantone colors, if it was a Pantone color, so for example, caps lock on, very important, right? Case and space sensitive. So now if I said, well, yeah, this is supposed to be 12, I'm just going to put in some round numbers and stuff like that. Okay. And I say, yep, that's the color right there from Swatchbooks that hits that Pantone 185C and lets me match my Pantone color. So when I put that information in there, Pantone has a higher priority here in the print mode define tab. That has the highest priority. If it doesn't find that name here, it would look here. If it doesn't find it here, then it would resolve here eventually, which is going into our Pantone colors, okay? So keep this in mind. You know, the color recipes are here. It's going to be pulling up this information and doing a replacement. Highest priority. Pardon me?
I ask a quick question. When you set the values,
Sure.
when you set the values in there, I didn't see black.
Yeah, I'm using a RGB profile, so it's made of just CMY. Yours would if you have a profile for CMYK or any of those other special inks like orange inks and red inks and green inks. So if you got extended ink in with your print, yeah, whatever your profile is made of. I'm using an RGB Pantone profile, so it's just got CMY in there. But yeah, it's proper for this particular printer, what I'm working with, yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So when we look at this, there is that priority, and it's going to overwrite the data that's there. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete that Pantone out of there, but I'll leave my logo red in there. So again, case and space sensitive, we're pointing it to the exact same materials, the exact same mode. And this is important. When I added this color here, I was able to specify the recipe, the name, and when I started out, I picked the mode, okay? So you see how there's also a 300 CT? Okay, let me go ahead and click OK on this, and I want to remind you guys about this in the quick set. I'm going to go back up here into Edit Quick Set. In my quick set, this is where we select the mode. So this is also important because we want to be able to get the color to replace, and we need to make all those things match. And so this is the situation we're in. If I had this at 300 and I'm ripping my files at 300 resolution, you know, my mode, well, I just added that in my color library at 600. The color will not swap. It's got to match. I didn't add it to 300. I added it to 600. So I want to point that out. This could be a little zinger right here if you're not paying attention. If you've got multiple modes for your profile, you want to make sure you select that proper mode. All right, while we're in this quick set, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday, I want to remind you guys about something here. This checkbox, Use Spot Color Replacement Table, when this checkbox is on, Setup, Rip Configuration, Color Matching Table, when that checkbox is on, Use Spot Color Replacement Table, all three of these tabs are live and engaged and active and working and applying and converting and swapping. As long as the name matches, it's using this information. If that checkbox is off, these three tabs take a vacation. They don't do anything. Everything will be dependent upon the Illustrator file to describe that recipe. Okay, so the checkbox has to be on Use Spot Color Replacement Table in order for this, the color matching table, to be active. So I did add this in here, and I set this up as a red color. I gave it a recipe for my patches. Okay, logo red. Now I'm going to go back into my Illustrator file, and I want to show you this, how this works, that this is working. Here's my logo red. All right, not anymore. Okay, beautiful. I'm going to save as, so I don't overwrite my original, and I'll call this logo red as green. Okay, as silly as that might be. Now you'll notice, it's an AI file. I'm going to also save that out as supported format. Onyx works in PDF, EPS, JPEG, and TIFF. Those are the 4 formats that our engineering team tests for repeatability: PDF, EPS, JPEG, TIFF. So our support team, our engineering team, they go through and they make sure that those 4 formats are reliable and repeatable. The native Illustrator AI or the native Photoshop PSD may work in your RIP, but our engineering team does not test for this. They don't go through and extensively test AIs and Photoshop PSDs and all that kind of stuff, because Adobe's always making updates and minor builds. It would be quite a task to be undertaking. So they pretty much lock it down to PDF, EPS, JPEG, and TIFF as the 4 formats that they test reliability for through our versions. Okay, I'm going to bring that in, and here it is. Logo red is green, and I'm going to bring that in, and I'm going to bring that into Job Editor. And it's green. It should hit my color matching table and swap out to red. So my preview here had better be red. If it's not red, then what's wrong? I named it wrong, I didn't put it to the right media or mode, or it wasn't a spot color when I was in Illustrator. It was a process build, okay? So one of the things that could be wrong if it doesn't swap out, and it's about the things that it takes to make this to work. So there's my color recipe. And if I hover with my cursor, at the bottom of the screen down here, you'll see the dot percent. 10.2, 79.2, and 91.4, that's the recipe I typed into my patch. That's what I get to swap out because the name is there. While we're here in Job Editor, I want to remind you the blue circle with the white eye for information, named colors. This will also show you the spot colors that are in the file. Okay, now I want to take you guys through another scenario with this, and then there's more things I want to talk to you guys about in Swatchbooks. So I'm going to open up, actually I'll just bring this file back up here. I'm going to open this up in Job Editor. It's the other example I have. So let's say I want to work with this green, this spot color custom green. And again, I can go to that I named colors and show you I've got a spot color called custom green. So let's say I print this green. Let me hop back into my little example here of my greens. I got this green or that green, pretty dramatic. This could be, if you see how this is sort of the same hue, maybe it's lightness, maybe it's chroma. When we look at these, that could be some hue, could be maybe light to dark, maybe chroma, but chances are might be a hue difference. But just to say, it's all in how we see it. But when we're evaluating this, we can say, okay, I'm going to evaluate this, and maybe I'll take this example and do this based on chroma, make changes based on chroma. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is go back into my Job Editor software, and I'm going to show you a different way. I print this file, I evaluate. I'm going to show you a different way of going into Swatchbooks. Besides the main level in the RIP queue, I can go to my Color Correction tab. Under Tools, I would go to Color Replacements. Now I know what you're going to say. You've got named color replacements there. This is a named color. It's a custom green. It's a spot color. But I'm going to do this through Color Replacements. I'm going to hit this little plus symbol with the eyedropper in the upper left corner to make a new pair of a color replacement. Here's my color replacements window. I'm going to click on current color and press the sample button. Okay, see how that's on, off, on, off. I'm going to press that sample button. I'm going to sample the current color of this green. It will change to the color on the right, desired color, which are all zeros. So when I click on this green, it's no surprise, it goes to white. But my point in all this is I'm grabbing the color from my file, and I'm going to go down here to Swatchbooks. And now I load that color into Swatchbooks. So just to make this a little bit more visual, I'm going to go to 8 patches so you can see a bigger transition, larger squares here to see the change. So the display is a little bit different. That's all, just to change that to show you. Now I might say, yeah, you know, I really felt that was chroma all day long. Maybe I want to do plus or minus 7 or 6. Now I can say, yep, I'm going to print that. I'm going to do 20 of those. I like that. Print. Print a label, sure. Now, Swatchbook has been sent to the printing queue. I am in Job Editor, the separate program from RipQ. So what I can do is leave this here, go back into my RipQ, and I can see my file coming in, and I can send that information over. Oh, did I not have the, what's going on here? I don't see my file in my queue. It wasn't my right printer, right? All right, give me a second. Figure this out where my data's at. Well, I know that's my other patch. All right, so let's say we've got the patches here. We've got the patch information here in this list. We would print those squares, evaluate it, switch back into Job Editor, and now I can type in whatever that recipe was that became the match. And now in version 19, you can completely tab through these windows. Before you couldn't tab through these, it would just go back and forth in the 2 steps. Now it does them all. So I can do the swap out here. That's the recipe, and then submit my job. Now I have the recipe. I can go back into my swatch library, and I can add that color in to my print mode define colors. And now I can add that spot color name, custom green, and I can start typing in my recipes. I don't know, whatever it was. I'm just kind of going off the cuff here, but that's where I would enter my recipe. And now that's going to take the place for that color. So we have a method of doing this just straight out in Swatchbooks. At the top here, picking that information, or we can go into opening our file directly into Job Editor, going into color correction, changing to our color replacements, sampling the target color, coming into the software with swatches, producing those changes based on whatever it is we need to do. Okay, printing those, going to my RIP queue, printing that information. I wonder if it's because it was in the buffered area down there. Now my job's up at the top. That could very well be it. Print those swatches, find the recipe that's the match, go back into Job Editor, close that out now, and I can say that this is really 5, 59, 72, and that's really the color for the match. And again, I'm going to turn back around in my RIP queue and add that to my color library and save that information. If that was a spot, that's a process build, but just to say if that was a spot color. So you've got a couple different ways of going about and doing this complete cycle of the swatches. So let's go back into Swatchbooks and talk about another example here. I'm going to go back into just CMYK. I'm going to put in some numbers in here and start out with something like that. So in some cases, when you are going through the evaluation process, and you're trying to figure out what's the difference. I want to match the target down below here. This is the printed sample. Is it lightness? Is it chroma? Is it saturation or hue? We're looking at some of these things, like this is a clear example of a hue. The blues are very different types of blues, so hue would shift that. But when you're evaluating this and you're trying to decide how are your colors not matching and what is it going to take to get to that matched target color, when you're looking at these types of things and you start to go through and do your printing, maybe you feel like, well, you know, it could be saturation, it could be chroma, it could be lightness, and you're not sure. There's nothing wrong with doing a series of them. I can start out with saturation and print that. Then I can change this to lightness and print that. Then I can change this to chroma and print that. And then lastly, I can do my hue and print that. So now I can print all four of those and then look at them. Well, which one was it? Lightness, chroma, hue, saturation, and decide and find my recipe. Again, when you come up with the recipe, we add that to our print mode defined colors, and that's going to lock in the values. Okay, one more thing I want to show you guys here in the swatch books. Besides, and I'm just going to go back down to one example here of eight patches. Instead of one-dimensional changes, where I'm picking these options, lightness, chroma, hue, saturation, I could also change to two-dimensional changes. Now, horizontally, you'll notice saturation is gone. It's only available in the one-dimensional change. But you'll see lightness is an option here. Change horizontally, or vertically change in chroma, or change in hue and change in chroma. We cannot have the same of the two things, obviously. It makes no sense. You wouldn't do that. You'd be in a one-dimensional change. So the menu will tell you so, as you saw. But this is where you can come in here and you could vary how you want this to be. Change in hue horizontally, but vertically change in chroma. If we go to three-dimensional changes, we now get all three, and the additional content is pages. How many additional pages do you want to run? So just to say you've got more than one dimension to make changes based on, or axes based on. Now, when I go back into one dimension, sometimes you make your prints, you look and you evaluate, and then you say, this recipe seems to need, you know, more of this or less of that % value, and you're not getting it here. Well, you could always break out into manual mode. Manual mode, as you see when I hover, it's going to control the two endpoints. In a one-dimensional change, it's the far left and the far right. If you double-click that, you can type in the recipe. And I can say, yeah, I kind of feel like maybe this should be 52 and this should be 48. And then double-click this one, and you can change that to something different completely. So instead of 52, 48, maybe I'm going to take this down or up to 62 and 58 or something like that. So you can type in your own values. Okay. If we go to two-dimensional, you get all four corners. And if you go to three-dimensional, you get all four corners for all two pages here, or how many pages you have. Now, anything you type in here is what it's going to apply. So it might seem crazy, but just to show you, why I do this is to show you that there's no limit. If I did something like that, it will calculate between those patches and make those changes. Or if I said I want to be two-dimensional and I change the recipes, okay, this is something, this would not make sense color-wise, but just to say, I want to show you the software does not limit you. It doesn't stop you. It doesn't say, hey, that's crazy. Why would you go from a blue to an orange to a red and all that kind of stuff? It's going to let you do what you want. So again, we can always, of course, change our recipes and control some type of standard setting as you want that to be and make that variation accordingly. So I can control what I want these steps to be. And I can control the variations. So just to say, you can always go back in there and make those changes, or Auto will automatically detect and make those changes itself on its own. So that's the swatch books. when we print these swatches and we come up with, in that printed sample, we come up with the recipe that's below that one patch, and we say that is the color. That one patch right there is the recipe. That's the golden value. That recipe, of course, we talked about, gets added to the RIP configuration color matching table and the print mode defined colors, okay? So print mode defined colors and swatch books work hand in hand, okay? They work hand in hand. When I add these color libraries in here, and it could be a Pantone color, like we talked about, could be that. When I add these recipes in here, the recipe is for the RIP. We do not go back into Illustrator and say, hello, Illustrator, people, make this logo red 10.2, 79.2, 91.4. We don't do that. Remember, we are having a color conversion take place. From input to output, color management is active. So we are converting input to output. We talked about this in yesterday's class. So color management from input to the RIP settings, control settings, we are active, and so we're having a conversion. So you need to go through and set that up, you know, and say this is not going to be your color recipe. More that in Illustrator, you are going to be naming that spot color appropriately. They can color whatever you want, like you saw here. They colored it in green and it's red, and we got the swap out. Now, let me say, you might not want to do that just in case somebody overlooked something and processed it with a different profile. It would not do the swap out, and you're going to clearly get a green color where you want it red. But just to say, that's all your decisions in the desktop area, how you want to handle things. But just keep in mind, this information is dependent upon that name that's there, the spot color name. We've got our spot color replacement table on. That's important. When that's on, it's going to be active through our color matching table menu. And I want to remind you guys, too, in the samples folder, we've got a Pantone folder, and we do have a series of different Pantone charts in here. They're 30 by 42 inches. After you get your printer in good shape and you calibrate and make sure you're doing a nice, printing all your nozzles are firing, you do a cleaning cycle, maybe you create your own media profile. You can always print this Pantone chart and then compare your Pantone colors to the Pantone book. And if any of these are not matching, you can perform swatch books on them. Type in the name in our library with the spot color data, and it's going to call up that library and the color. And for some of you who maybe say, well, that's nice, or it's not a big deal, that's fine. You know where your color data is. You can still go through and rip and print other colors that are not having Pantones in them, like our examples. I had that logo red and custom green in here. It's all about that being a spot color that we need to match and replace. So when it comes to backing up data, we can always go into our print mode defined colors and export them out. And we can make a folder for our backup, new folder, and I can say Onyx backup, whatever I call it. The file that's going to be created is this generically named colortable.tab, and I can save that information. I can save those out. Now, I'm going to kind of mention a little tip. I don't know if this is something that will matter or not, but let's say you have a bunch of colors in here for a bunch of different printers and media. You got a pretty good library going, and you're cranking out the swatch books, and you're getting colors to match, and you're putting them in your library, and this is a lot of very important, precious data you have here now. You have a good definition base of these spot colors that you need to match. So, yeah, I want to back this data up. I'm going to export this. In our documentation, which I'm going to email you again, some of you have gotten this from the first class, but I'm incorporating it in all my classes. We do talk about backing up the spot color table here. So spot colors can be exported. In the RIP queue, setup, RIP configuration, color matching table, and then export. And you can do this for the user-defined as well as the print mode-defined colors. But notice this says print mode-defined colors can also be exported as tab files. This is not needed if the media profiles are exported. So if you just export out your profiles, these color libraries in print mode are included in it. However, if you're like me, I still like to back it up all possible ways just to have it as a backup. So also a little tip might be, as you get this library growing along of all these names in here and these colors, possibly you want to go through and just do a screen grab of this, you know, the printer, the media, the mode, and the names and the recipes, and then have them, like, you know, somewhere near the computer there. And if you're ever wondering, does this color look like it's supposed to look? Did somebody change the recipe? Did something change? You can look at this and then look at the recipe and get out that screen grab and kind of, you know, that piece of printed paper and kind of compare it and say, yeah, it's, you know, 65 and 9 and 81 or whatever. Otherwise, the only way you're going to know is if you re-import that data. And so, you know, just to say, it's something that you can, as a quick glance, if you take a screen grab of all these names that you put in here, you can quickly verify it visually without having to go through the process of re-importing the data back into the library. Just a small thing, that's all. Okay, let's see. I'm going to hop back into the chat. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a moment here. And I'm going to see some of your chat messages you've got. Let's see. So we've got a lot of chats going on here. Okay, can you explain why the numbers under the swatch cannot be put directly into the Illustrator art? Yes. Give me one moment and I can talk about that. Let me close some of this stuff out. And one moment, everybody. Let me try to pull this file up and then let me get back in here and talk about this. 1 second. Just 1 second. I want to find my particular files that I've got. All right. So let me get this to come up on the screen again, share content. Okay. So to answer the question, can I explain why I cannot put those values back into Illustrator? Because I have my quick set on, all ICC profiles on, color management is taking place input to output. So when I look at this information, this is part of yesterday's session, our input data is getting converted through this profile connection space, okay, using a color management system in LAB to convert input to output. This is why a 50% cyan tint, when we go through our conversion, on the way out to our printer using our media profile, will not be a 50% tint, or if we look at it in Job Editor. So this is why input to output may vary. So a 50% tint may actually come up and wind up being, you know, 49.2 or 51.8 or something to that effect. So Anthony, yes, that's the reason why, is input gets converted to output. Now, in my RIP, if I disable this, if I say all ICC profiles off, I am not going through this conversion process. And then everything depends on Illustrator's value, okay? Everything depends on what we're doing there and that information. So this is the one thing that, you know, is taking place in a RIP. In most cases it can be disabled or not, but this is the type of thing that's taking place, so you want to make sure that, or understand that that's what's happening and that's what's taking place in that process. All right, let me go ahead and cancel out of there. Another question we have, color placements we did. Is it possible to print them? Yep, got that, Tab. Okay, let's see. Yeah, some of you guys are helping each other out with some of these questions, which is nice. Thank you. Is there a limit of the number of names that can be used, can be in the user-defined colors? There's not a limit that I know of. So when we go to set up RIP configuration color matching table, you've got the user-defined colors. Yeah, to the best of what I know, the user-defined colors, there is no limit to put that information in there. And same with the print mode. There shouldn't be any type of limit to this. You're just putting in the recipe libraries. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think there is. So, okay. I think that might be everything. Any other questions? See, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing out my screen. Okay, so everybody stay tuned. I'm trying to get all that stuff emailed out to you guys. I got to do this out in little groups for everybody. And then what I'll do is send this information to you with the link. I've got to get the links to the WebEx things to send that out to. That's on my list of things to do. They're very large files, so we're trying to get that negotiated and sent that out. Okay, another question. If having to do swatch book often is an indication that color management needs to be optimized, if targeting max Pantone, was it your suggestion for color management? Oh, what's my suggestion for color management sense? Oh, again, yeah, that's the thing. When it comes to the color management settings, it really, people are fond of saying they want to work with Adobe 1998. It is a larger source color and input color. For the CMYK conversion, if you're working with CMYK data, swap should be okay, but some people are going to Grackle for the Grackle standard, so it's almost like a G7 combination effect. But really, it's just a matter of kind of testing to see. Rendering intent, this might be where you want to change to relative color metric with black point compensation and try to get the most out of your color range there. But really, when we think about what's the best information, suggestions for color management settings, it's just a matter of testing things. If you make your own profile or use a provided profile, you can always go through in Media Manager and see what the gamut report is for matching those Pantones. So that could be something that you kind of go through and see how much color are you really getting out of this. So. Okay, another good question. At what point would you suggest changing profile or ICC build options? Again, in our build options, I'd say if you're first off, you have to decide, are you liking the input to output conversion? What you're doing upstream in Photoshop, are you liking what you're getting in those color choices? So when we start out with, let me get back in here. We go back in and we say edit color settings. Here we go. What's your settings? Let me go back to my default. What are your settings? Are you happy with what you're doing to your files upstream? Are you converting them? Are you leaving them as is? What are you doing with your files upstream? And that's got to be consistent. And then on the back end, what are you going to do with things here at the back end in your RIP software, and how are you going to negotiate that data in color management? That's a good input to output conversion. Now, generally speaking, you output some files and you evaluate, and you're going to kind of see, well, where are you at as far as all of your color goes? Are you happy with what you're seeing? And you can always print out some Pantone color charts and see how your Pantones are, or run that media gamut report in the Media Manager and compare how many percentages of Pantones are you within a good spec. From there, you can always experiment. Make a copy of your ICC profile. Excuse me. You can make a copy of your ICC profile and go in and make changes for your color management ICC build options and see what you get. Remember, depending on if you need accurate color or if you wanted boosted, vibrant color, that's where some of those changes are going to come from. How much of that information are you going to push out and get that to process? So some of those things just depend on, which avenue, but start small, start at the beginning. What are we doing in desktop? The input data coming into the RIP could have a big impact on how colors are manipulated just from our input file going through the process control space, the conversion profile control space, and going into our profile. The back end is our output profile for sure, but you have to take into consideration kind of all of these different things that come into play. With all this happening in color management, there's so much that's involved from beginning to end. Start out with a good starting point, and then from there, you can always make a copy of your profile, of your media profile, and edit those build options, and then print and experiment with the different settings and see. And like I said, it does depend. You want, accurate color, you're looking for boosted color, that type of thing, just pleasing color, that type of thing. There's a lot of different avenues you could take. All right. Is there a document you have for color management and profile settings if your target is maximum Pantone? Well, the only thing we have is in that media manager, we can assess our profile against the Pantone library. Knowing that in Onyx, we've got the Pantone library of colors, that information that's there is something that we could evaluate our information for the gamut report. So you can always, in Media Manager, you can always go to the tools and make that assessment and evaluate it to the Pantone library. But really, I mean, to try to get as much color as you possibly can. And you got to be careful when you're making a profile. More ink doesn't just mean more color, so there's a lot to it. You want to get a good optimal amount of ink and have your color profiling kind of assessed from there as well. There's a lot of things to consider along the way for that. I hope that kind of answers your question, Jen. All right, any other questions out there? All right, so we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to go ahead and I'll end the session. If you guys could just be patient. I'm trying to get all that information out to you guys and send that so that you at least get some information with what we've had in the past classes. And I'm working on those links to the recordings, and we're going to get that out to you as well. All right, so thank you, everybody.